David, thank you so much for taking the time with us today, particularly given how busy you are, which we'll get onto in a moment. But it was nearly 10 years ago that I read your book, The End of Illness. Maybe we could touch on that in a moment. But before we do, and perhaps in lieu of me sharing your amazing bio, can you just let us know, how are you spending your time? It's an unprecedented time at the moment. How are you spending your time?
Unfortunately, it's awake is the real answer, not asleep. I'm a cancer doctor, so I am still taking care of patients with cancer. I still have research labs that are researching new treatments, but a significant percentage of my time is spent on COVID-19 at the present time, working to develop new diagnostics, so ways of identifying the virus, and especially identifying what is immunity to the virus, as well as working on some of the vaccine programs to get them out here in the United States and together with the Tony Blair Institute in Africa.
And both sides of the Atlantic, I understand you're sharing some of your wisdom. So maybe we'll get back to that. But let's start with the End of Illness book. The sign of a good book is I could vaguely remember 10 years ago some take. And some of them for me was the fact that the human body is a complex system, and it's kind of taken, it's evolved, or it's been honed over hundreds of millions of years. Another was that evolution selects for good kids rather than longevity. I remember that and being slightly scared by that as a concept. Another was the importance of routine, and I think you'll be pleased to hear I got a dog in during lockdown, which is clearly good for that. And the final one that was impressive to me was just how you were willing to challenge the orthodoxy and some of the assumptions, whether it be the sort of importance of vitamins or anything else. But as you look back over the last 10 years, before we start focusing on the next 10 years, what do you think you kind of got right and got wrong in the book, or what surprised you about what's unfolded since?
When I wrote the book, I had to me, the concept that really stuck was diseases are verbs and not nouns, right? Cancer is something the body does, not something the body gets. And I was looking at the body at this complex system. When you say that to people, their eyes glaze over, right? How do you understand what weather is, what an economy is? You really can't. And, so initially when people hear this, they got, somewhat downtrodden. They go, oh, it's just so complex. Whereas the counter is you can control things you don't understand. And so that statement, many pure scientists had offended, many reductionists, it's just, it really was too much for them. And it was daunting at first. But now, I think there is a new understanding of this. And I think that is somewhat gratifying. What did I get right and wrong? In many respects, science doesn't change as much as we think. Is the good thing, is that if you look at the evolution of most of the recommendations, what is considered health, disease prevention, it's not much different than it was 10 years ago when the book came out. That's the positive. The negative is science doesn't change as much as we think, and we haven't improved much over the last 10 years. So I more look at it in that angle, is I wish there were so many new things out there and ways I could really hone in and get fine-grained detail about what to do. But it hasn't changed that much. That's the good and the bad. We still are not using data for good. So many of the answers to the diseases we all suffer from are sitting in the records of the National Health System, sitting right there, that data. When we mine that data, we will get answers that can transform all of our lives, but it's still sitting there in the computers or in the cloud.
It's so interesting. You kind of got that data Cambrian explosion right. This proliferation of data, our ability to process it at low cost. But then in many ways, we haven't seen the impact. One reason, I guess, is this sort of different data lakes that aren't tacked together. I know that you've talked a lot about the importance of nomenclature as well. If you've got two different sets of data and they can't be kind of merged elegantly, they're not useless, but they're not far off useless.
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the things the most frustrating in our field. 50 years ago, a group of people got in a room and literally argued overnight and came up with data standards for commerce. And MasterCard or credit cards came out of that. And all of a sudden, literally overnight, you can purchase something from New York City while you were in London, and the funds would be transferred and you would receive that item. And it worked. We haven't yet done that in medicine. Right? You called a broken leg, I call it a fractured leg. We haven't come up with standard data elements so that our data can go together. We can learn from the collective experience, because every doctor puts things in words. Words are not data element, they're descriptors. And so we really need to hone down and come up with simple, standardized data elements, and not just in the UK, really globally, and then we can all learn from each other. And it can be very powerful. Look at this dastardly virus. We still, when the virus first came out and you went on a ventilator, your rate of survival was 25%. Now that number is up to 75%, and that's without drugs. That's just all of us working together and sharing how we care for the virus. What are the settings? What is the oxygen? How do we deal with the intravenous fluids and other things? And we've dramatically improved outcome. Well, think if we did that in all of medicine. If we could standardize the data elements and learn from every encounter. As you know well, when you search on Google today, your search is better than yesterday. They went and see what people searched and the results, and they iterate, and it gets better. When I treat a patient today, it's very similar to what it was a year ago, 5 years ago, and 10 years ago. We have to learn from every experience.
Makes sense. And actually, this interoperability, in wearing my tech hat, there's often a joke that's told that 80% of a data scientist's job is cleaning the data, and then 20% of their job is complaining about having to clean the data. So even in the industries that you talk about, it's a nightmare. Are you starting to see some sort of signs of hope around this nomenclature, APIs, and the sharing of data and establishing agreements? You do some great international work, Tony Blair Institute being an example of it. Are you starting to see kind of better sharing happening?
Question. First of all, if that's your idea of a joke, you got to do some work there. No, I do think that there are now, it's in the conversation. It's in the conversation at every level. It's in your governmental conversation. I've talked to Matt Hancock about it multiple times. And I think, there really is an understanding that we need to do that as a field. We are one of the last to get to actually computing. We're last to become digital from analog. We all went to health records. That was for billing. It was for efficient transfer of information. It was not for treating patients better. So the notion of actually using those systems, these computers, which are pretty powerful in today's world, to actually improve care is profound. One of the things that we're seeing with COVID-19, I think, is a new understanding of data. And I think there will be an unleashing or unlocking of much of the data there in the cloud. We're working with Tony Blair Institute, actually doing that in sub-Saharan Africa. And it's pretty amazing if you think about it, is that some of the advances will be first done there because we have to. It's cost efficient. It could dramatically improve care. It's not going to make the great doctors better, but it'll make the average or the good doctors great. And I think that's what's really powerful, is that we can, equalize care across a country, across a continent, by using these kinds of technologies. And they're remarkably scalable. They are cheap. We now know how to protect privacy. We know how to allow each person's health data to be in their own provenance and them to control it, but at the same time to use the information that underlies it to help others.
I love that. I reminded you used the financial services example. If you look at Africa, financial services leapfrogged the West in many ways. You had M-Pesa, where payments over SMS were completely established in Kenya before we ever saw in the sort of developed world. Do you see that potentially happening then in healthcare as well? You've seen some examples of adoption where they don't have to work around the clunky Western systems.
No question. We have a lot of legacy systems here where our information is stored. In the United States and in many countries across the world, when you get a vaccine, it's written on a piece of paper. And I have a yellow card with all of my vaccines. Well, that's certainly not efficient. That's not accurate. It's a very difficult way to practice public health, especially when vaccines like COVID-19 are coming out. They're going to be 2-part shots and have tremendous implications of where you can go and who you can interact with. Well, certainly using a biometric for your identification and putting that information in the cloud is very possible. And you can have a barcode, if you will, that says your status for immunity for various viruses to enable you to go places and not harm others. The thing about healthcare, especially when we're talking infectious diseases, is not just yourself, it's harming others. When tobacco was, going up dramatically, its usage, the thing that really halted and decreased its use across the globe was the argument of secondhand smoke. So it wasn't necessarily what you did to yourself. You had a right to smoke in your own home, but you didn't have a right to harm others. That is smoking in a crowded restaurant or on a train where you could actually harm others in the compartment or your children with that smoke. So secondhand smoke work. But that same argument goes to infectious disease. And we really need technology liberated from the desktop of a doctor to your handheld so you can know who and how you can interact.
And I'm reminded of the sort of politicization of the mask debate at the moment, though. It strikes me that the data around the importance of masks is pretty irrefutable, but it's now become a political football. And so even with the data, occasionally, it can be kind of usurped and poor information is shared. So we still run a risk, don't we, that actually even you and I have one point of view on what's kind of objective data and others will politicize.
To get normative behavior change, you need leadership. In my field, health, which is 28% of the world economy, health and food, there is almost no leadership. And so it's very difficult in this domain to actually say what is truth versus not without that leadership. And so in today's world where on the internet, you can find everything. And, especially when you look at COVID-19, it's a fantastic example because science played out in the public eye. And this has really never happened before. So with the advent of social media and everybody knowing everything, people in masses were able to see science learn. And in the beginning, we didn't know there was asymptomatic or we call pre-symptomatic spread. That is a day or two before you're before you have the virus and are symptomatic, you can be infectious. And that is totally new to this virus. And we had no idea of it in science. And so you saw our recommendations change. Well, right there, that makes the conspiracy theorists say, oh my gosh, there's a conspiracy theory here because things are changing. Whereas we were learning on the spot and we were learning in front of the public. And that was new and that was scary. And then you had inning one where it made sense, right? You stay at home and everyone understood that. Well, inning two is, well, this person's saying wear a mask in this county wears a mask and this doesn't. This county says go to school and this county doesn't. It was a decision. And within decision comes the rise of the conspiracy theorists, rise of, anything you can find on the internet. And it's very difficult when you don't have validated sources and it becomes scary. And so in this case where if you think or you have the wrong information, you can go out, not wear a mask and spread the virus to others, and you can unintentionally harm them or kill them. And that's what's really scary about this virus, is that this invisible enemy, when you're asymptomatic and you don't know it, you go and hug grandma, you can cause the demise of grandma.
I think one of the other challenges is the validated sources that to fall back to are often behind paywalls, whereas the misinformation is often free.
Great point.
We have to make sure we sort of democratize access to the good information rather than just all information.
So you're saying outlaw paywalls is what your policy is.
I'm not saying that, but I certainly think we should make sure we can access. Maybe we should put a paywall on bad information. The inverse argument. One of the sort of great leaders of the UK that we probably reference too often was Winston Churchill. And when forming the United Nations after the World War II, he said the famous quote, kind of never let a good crisis go to waste. We've talked about some beautiful examples of that actually give me optimism for the world post-COVID. I think one of the things that we have also found difficult, and we find difficult with data, is the more data you have, the more you have to know what you're optimizing for. And a lot of this stuff is multivariate. So as you've been having these discussions about kind of health generally, but more recently in COVID, how do you think about the right thing to be optimizing for in a multivariate problem?
I mean, you hit it, right? You need an optimization parameter for what you do. And the challenge in health is, I tell you, hey, I want you to do something that's going to be good for your health. But the problem is you're not going to see the effects till 10, 20 years later. And if I do something that prevents a disease, you don't even realize it. You don't realize that with the absence of something, that something actually worked. And that's what's really, really difficult in our space. And that's what's challenging. And so when you've got that lag period between intervention and outcome, and when the outcome at the collective group is dramatically better, but at an individual level, I don't have a measurement, right? I don't have an optimization parameter. So my first book, The End of Illness you referred to, I first called it What is Health? And I sent it to the publisher, and I was so proud of the title and the book. And about a week later, the publisher called me up and he goes, David, Steve Jobs called and he changed the title of your book. I go, what? And I called up Steve. I go, what are you doing? He goes, first of all, David, you can't put the word health in the title. It's a bad word. As soon as you say health, people think of eating cauliflower and Brussels sprouts and doing all the things they don't want to do. It's an unappetizing term. And nobody can gift a book with the word health in the title because it implies the other person's in bad health. So he came up with the title, The End of Illness, a bold and declaratory, statement. I said, why did you call the publisher and not me? He goes, it's their job to market the book, not yours, which was very hard to argue against Steve on these things. But it really goes to a notion, health is not a topic that people like. It's not a thing that people view as, positive. Mark Twain once said, the only way you keep your health is eat what you don't want, drink what you don't like, and do what you'd rather not. And so, the argument is, if you really look at the data, it's not that at all. But the hard thing is, I can't look at my watch and say, oh, I'm up to 92 today on my health score, so I'm doing good. We just don't have a measurement that relates to health. There's no blood test. There's no optical test. There's no technology that can say how healthy you are.
I know that you have sort of studied and shared your thinking a lot on inflammation and just the importance of the immune response. And do you think that will increasingly, perhaps with the use of digital, become a leading indicator for health? Could we find a kind of proxy for a health score through inflammation?
It's a great question. I mean, there's no question that inflammation is kind of the root of things. If you think about it, during evolution, you and I evolved a very potent inflammatory system because we almost all died of infectious disease throughout history. Now we've got antibiotics, antivirals, vaccines, and we could temper that down some and actually live much, much longer. And I think that's powerful. And we look at some of the treatments that have actually dramatically lowered the death rate of cancer, heart disease, delayed Alzheimer's, and other. Those are statins and aspirin, both of which work by lowering inflammation. So that's powerful. We don't yet have a great marker for inflammation. We've got generalized ones, but we don't have specific ones regarding health. But that may be one of the amazing things going forward. But that's in a sense what worries me about COVID-19 that people aren't talking about, is that you could be asymptomatic as a 20-year-old and get COVID-19. But if I did a CAT scan and looked inside your lung, I would find inflammation in your lung. We don't know how long that will last. We don't know the ramifications of that significant period of inflammation, even though you are asymptomatic. Will that dramatically raise your rate of heart disease and cancer down the road? Will you have lung problems down the road? We don't know those answers. So I'm certainly worried that there's going to be a cohort of people who have had medical issues from this virus, even if during the virus they did okay. We see that with the flu. You get the flu and you survive, your rate of heart disease and cancer are elevated a decade from now.
And if we don't, obviously you're working a lot on COVID vaccines at the moment, and given the prevalence may not be wide enough to get a statistically significant phase 2 or 3 signal, there's been a lot of talk around challenge trials. It strikes me challenge trials are an elegant solution for a quick bit of feedback, but how could we ever get comfortable with the risk you described? Like perhaps the asymptomatic in 10 years have all sorts of impacts and effects that we don't understand today. Do you think challenge trials are possible?
Well, yes. I mean, I think they're probable and I think they're likely. I think we're going to have heroes who step up and say, I'm willing to take some risk, just like they did in World War II, and said, I want to protect my country, my children, my fellow citizens. And they're going to do that. The vaccine, listen, with everything going on in the world, right? The vaccine, the leading candidate with the best science did not come out of the hottest tech company or the greatest technology university. It came from a university that survived the plague. It came from Oxford University. And it's absolutely remarkable. And obviously you have worked on it and involved with it. And I certainly have a privilege to work with the people there. But if you think about it, with that vaccine, what a challenge trial will do, it's say, hey, listen, let's give the vaccine. And then when we think there's immunity, let's give the virus and see if those people become symptomatic. Now we have an antidote, if you will. We have something called monoclonal antibodies, which are very efficient at blocking the virus. So we can turn the virus off and do that and have people step up and said, if I can make the vaccine come out 1 day sooner, 1 week sooner, I can save lives. And I want to do that with the understanding that there may be some personal risk, but I'm going to do it because I want to help others. And I think we're seeing tremendous volunteerism in that regard. The number of people who have signed up for it dwarf what I would even imagine. And so I think we are obligated in science to do the challenge trial and to do it right, to do it with the right vaccine candidates, with the antidote, the monoclonal antibodies in hand in case there's an issue, to take these people, isolate them in an area where they're not going to be exposed to others, and to learn quickly so we can get this vaccine out to the masses and enable us to go back to our way of life, enable our kids to go to school, our economy to go back to where it should be.
Completely agree. And actually, at a time when just yesterday Africa was declared free of wild polio, I hope deeply that we appreciate the work going on vaccines and infectious diseases in a way that maybe we haven't over the last decade. We're at 20 minutes and we have very clear instructions, but just a final question, if I may kind of indulge myself. We've talked about digital, we've talked about how medicine's evolving. What else do you expect over the next 10 years, taking that time frame, do you think might change in medicine? In a way, every hospital visit is kind of a failure of outpatient care, and every outpatient visit is a failure of home care. Do you think that we're going to see kind of strides forward over the next 10 years, and which directions are particularly ripe for exploring?
Oh, it's so cool what's going on now. And I think part of it is COVID related, right? COVID spurred us to realize that we need to get better at what we call point of care testing. The notion of going to your doctor or a hospital to collect data and then going home and have them call you with the results makes zero sense. So you're going to see a rise in the next 6 months of point of care testing. That is, you get sent a disc in the mail and you prick your finger and you put the drop of blood on the disc. That disc can be either mailed to a hospital or run at your local place of business or your local pharmacy and give the data through the cloud to your doctor. And when you go to your doctor for a visit, or do it by telemedicine, which is rising dramatically now, you can actually discuss the data, eye to eye, and have a conversation and an understanding of what's going on with you. And I think that's going to be very powerful. Just the notion, if you think about it, when you're sick at home, going to a doctor's office, sitting in the waiting room, spreading it to others when you don't feel well, and then that doctor looking at you, putting themselves at risk, obviously is not the way we should be doing medicine. So the idea that I can have delivered to you this disc where I can run studies at home and have the results instantaneously through computing in the cloud at a much lower cost and much easier is where medicine has to go. And I think it will go. When you go to your doctor and he or she check your blood pressure at 2 o'clock, that's one piece of data. Well, what is your blood pressure at 10 a.m., in the morning? What is it at 6 a.m. when you get up? At 5 o'clock when you're having dinner? Or at 8 o'clock when you're pissed off after a phone call? With enough data, error goes away. And with these technologies, we're going to have much more data. We're going to have better information on ourselves. And we, as an individual, will be in charge of our own data. And I think that's what's going to be exciting. The notion of your doctor or this health record, which is sitting there somewhere being in charge of your data, makes no sense. So it's going to be the transition of collecting of data to point of care, to your home, to your workplace, to your pharmacy, and then you being in charge of your own data and you having a new understanding. So not being told what to do, but actually having an understanding and making the right decision based on the data, which is now this new generation wants to do. You tell them what to do, their shoulders go up. You give them the data, they end up doing the right thing. That's where things are going.
Completely inspiring. And actually, well-organized, clearly labeled data has incredible option value. So I think this generation also understands that actually their data may be useful to them in the future in ways that we can't even envisage today. So I guess a clear message to encourage people to collect data, and we look forward to the developments in how we might kind of process knowledge out of it. David, we've overrun on time, but as always, I've learned an incredible amount. I'm grateful to you for taking the time today, particularly when you're so busy. So thank you for all of the hard work, COVID related, but also outside in medicine more broadly. Thank you so much.
And thank you to you. And listen, I think we in America have to give tremendous sense to the entire United Kingdom. Many of the advances on therapy and vaccines are coming from the UK. In the United States, we made the decision to close our labs when COVID-19 happened. In the UK, you made the decision to put cots in your labs and have people stay there 24 hours. And that decision, the world will benefit from. So thank you.
Thank you very much.